Thunderhead by Mary O'Hara, Chapter 18. It was a warm August evening. Rob was driving to a ranch southwest of his own to inspect a mare. He had been told she was a registered thoroughbred, had been a racer, and was for sale cheap. The number of his own brood mares was down to 16. They were getting old. He had lost 4 in the last 2 years, and 2 more must be sold before fall because they would not live through another winter on the range. Colorado farmers who kept a few horses stabled through the winter might buy them for the sake of the foals they would drop in the spring. They would bring very little at auction, but anything would be better than feeding them to the coyotes on the saddleback. Nell was driving with him. They were on one of the back roads, not much more than wheel tracks on the prairie grass. It was just that moment of the evening when headlights are of no use and daylight is not enough. The car swept ahead so swiftly and at times so roughly that Nell was about to protest. But one look at Rob's face stopped her. He had his angry driving look. Nell withdrew a little into her own corner and sighed. It might have been a pleasant evening. She always enjoyed a drive at the end of the day when her work was done. But if he was going to be like this... "Gypsy hasn't long to go either," said Rob abruptly. "At this rate, my band of broodmares will soon be cut in half." "Couldn't you put some of the younger mares in the broodmare bunch?" asked Nell. "There are those 3 5-year-olds, the sorrels. They're wonderful mares. To be bred back to their own sire? That's line breeding, isn't it? You're always talking about it. But you can't do it indiscriminately. They have to be picked individuals. There isn't one of those mares good enough. What'll you do for broodmares then, Rob?" "Buy some more, I suppose, the way I bought all the others. Travel around to the racetracks, pick up mares of good blood that can't race anymore." Nell had a sinking sensation. Those buying trips that he took every 3 or 4 years cost upwards of $1,000. "Or else buy a new stallion," said Rob, "so that I can use my own young mares." "That might be the best way." "A new, purebred stallion?" exclaimed Nell. "Oh, Rob, why couldn't we just keep one of our own young stallions, not geld him?" "That's the way to start your horses on the downgrade," said Rob coldly. What difference does it make? The words were on the tip of Nell's tongue, but, for the 100th time, she held them back. Rob must be thinking the same thing. He must know that she was thinking it. But to say it would be like giving a little tap which would bring down the house of cards. "Or," she suggested, "you could get a government stallion. That wouldn't cost anything." "Do you suppose I could turn a government stud loose on the range to take care of the band the way Banner does? You can't get a stallion from the government unless you guarantee to keep him in. His mares must be corral bred. He must be fed oats the year around. That's what they are used to, and they can't live any other way." Nell made no answer. Rob wanted to fight. He didn't want to see a way out or to make any compromise. She changed the subject. "Rob, this horse I'm riding this summer, Cheyenne, I'm tired of him. He doesn't really give me a good ride. He's dull, and as far as his training goes, I've finished him. I don't want to ride him anymore." "That's fine," said Rob. "Now, what does he mean by that?" thought Nell. Aloud, she said, "I'd like another horse." "Who would you like?" asked Rob with elaborate politeness. "I was thinking I might take one of those you've been training for the army sale. How about Injun? Do you think he'd do anything to me?" "If you're going to ride Injun, you'd better get wings," said Rob, with a charge of his best sarcasm. "But go on and ride him if you want to. Suit yourself." "Well, that's nice," Nell muttered. A few moments later, Rob leaned towards her. "What did you say?" "Nothing." She withdrew further into her corner, and again the heavy silence wrapped about them. Strange, she thought, that 2 people could be so near each other physically, and yet so divided that they could hardly exchange a thought. The car plunged down a slope, ran through a creek, curved up the other side and came out on the level again. The day was nearly done. Nell saw a flight of wild ducks against the evening sky. Sitting at Rob's right, she had the sunset at her window. The wind was from the southwest, the prevailing fair weather wind that blows steadily over the United States. Is the wind getting stronger? No, it's just that we're coming out to where there's nothing to interrupt it. No shelter of any sort. It's got a 200-mile sweep here. Ungodly place to live. Presently, on a sudden impulse, Nell put her hand on Rob's thigh. She gave it 2 or 3 little affectionate pats. Often they rode for hours so. Often he would say, "Where's your little hand?" and she would put it there. But tonight, that muscular leg under the whipcord breeches felt like a stone. She withdrew her hand. "Rob, I've been thinking about Thunderhead. Ken is so awfully happy about him now, the speed he's developed. Do you think it's absolutely necessary to geld him?" "He's a 2-year-old, said Rob harshly. "All the other 2s are to be gelded. Why shouldn't he be?" "Ken is simply having a fit about it," said Nell. "Ken is a pain in the neck." "Besides," said Nell, "he's not really 2 yet, just 22 months. Rob explained with weary patience, as if to a child of subnormal intelligence. "We wait until there are 2 to geld them, in order to give their necks time to develop. But Thunderhead's neck is already developed like a 3-year-old's. He could have been gelded 6 months ago." Nell's cheeks burned. When Rob talked to her like that, she turned completely from him and fled away in spirit. She laid her arm along the open window and rested her head against it. She floated out on that westerly wind. She drifted on the shadowy plains. It was getting darker. Rob put on the headlights. A half-hour passed, during which a panorama of heavenly beauty composed itself as softly as a dream before Nell's rapt eyes. It was a sunset of blue and silver. The light had gone away from the earth, leaving a sea of darkness beneath a sky as blue as turquoise. The eyes, straining to discover at what far distant point that dark earth met the jeweled light of the sky, were lost in mystery. That was not all. There was a mile-long, torpedo-shaped lake of quicksilver some distance above the horizon, its edges as finely turned as if blown in glass, and below it, thrusting up from behind the earth, the tops of thunderheads, burning white, like great alabaster lamps lit from within. Must it wane, that scene of impossible beauty? Must it disappear? From moment to moment it was changeless before her eyes, as if it had been created for her alone, and her gaze sustained it. Perhaps no one else in the world was looking at it, the whole breadth and depth of creative power manifesting itself in flawless artistry for her delight. But yes, it was changing. The imperceptible altering and fading and flaring up and waning was incessant, like the movement of the earth rolling in space, all the stars rolling, the universe rolling, turning one face, then the other. It is not. The sunset dawned, burned, died at the slow swing of a gigantic, omnipotent arm. What were those lines from St. Augustine's Confessions? Something about the beauty of the elements proclaiming God. In another week or so, you can ride Injun if you want. I'll give him a good workout every day. Nell did not answer. Rob glanced at her. On her face, lying against the window frame, was the silver of the sunset. Her bang was ruffled and blown back, her eyes pools of shadow. "Did you hear me?" he asked harshly. "Yes, about Injun. It doesn't matter." Rob's voice rose. "You said you wanted him, didn't you? What's the matter now? Have you changed your mind?" Nell sat up suddenly. She was quivering all over. "Don't shout at me." But her face was still turned away, and the wind took her words. "What?" "Nothing." "What did you say?" Burning words rose to her lips. She could shout as well as he. But if she did, then in a moment they would both be at it, and there would be one of those unspeakable interchanges resembling the snarling of cats and dogs. The quarrel would blow over, but those words would send their echoes down the years and never be forgotten. I hate you. You're a brute. I wish I'd never seen you. Nell shivered in her thin dress of poppy-printed silk. I'm cold, she said. Rob brought the car to a jarring stop. Where's your coat? In the back. Every elaborate, leisurely motion he made as he got her grey reefer, invited her out and held it for her, made her feel she was holding up the procession. They got in the car again and went on. All evening, a moon had been sailing high in the heavens. Now, with the darkness, it began to glow. Presently, off to the right, they saw something suggesting a house. A little branch road led towards it. This must be it, said Rob doubtfully. He brought the car to a stop in front of a huddle of walls, fences, corrals. It must be, muttered Rob again, staring. Nell stared too. The moonlight made of the place a crazy silhouette. Rob got out and went towards the house. Nell continued to stare. Here it was, the decrepit building, one shed tacked like an afterthought onto the side of another, fences made of wire, palings, ties or poles pieced together, fallen in places, begun, abandoned, begun, again somewhere else. The house, with a single dim eye looking out, was a haphazard collection of boards, shakes, boxes, building paper, sheets of tin, not one line on the square. Here it was, the horror of her childhood, seen from the Pullman car windows, the carefully built and stubbornly cherished house of human despair, ceaselessly pounded by the wind that kept every fence corner filled with tumbleweeds, broken shingles, newspapers, and rubbish. Here it was, a thoroughbred mare. Nell saw the figures of her husband and a tall bent man coming from the house. The man carried a lantern. They went to the pile of sheds off across the yard and disappeared from view. Nell sat there in the car, in so deep a depression that when she heard a voice by her window it startled her. It was a cultured voice, the grammar perfect, the accent almost English. Wouldn't you like to come in and wait until our husbands have finished their business? An old woman was standing beside the car, her thin grey hair, which had pulled loose from the little knob at the back, whipped by the wind. It was a face often seen on marginal farms and ranches deep in the country, a face of character and refinement. The beak of a nose, just a blade-like bone covered with skin. The long, hanging jaw, the small, shiny false teeth, the walnut-coloured skin, quilted with deep lines, and in the sunken, colourless eyes, the look of endurance that had begun ages ago, and would never end. The patient voice repeated its question. "Oh, thanks very much," exclaimed Nell. "I think I'll just wait here, or could I go to the stables? I'd like to see the mare too." "I'll show you the way," said the old woman courteously. They picked their way between weeds, clods of dirt, upturned kerosene cans, farm tools, rolls of wire, to the yard before the barn and went in. There was the mare. The man had led her by a rope halter into the foreground and Rob was looking her over. Oh, why does he even look at her, the poor thing? Why does he give them any hope at all? The fine long legs of the mare seemed barely able to support her. There was a sway in her back. The aristocratic head hung lifelessly. She did not even turn to look at them. There was a deep collar grove at the base of her neck. "You use her for ploughing?" asked Rob. "Yes. She can do as good a day's work as any horse you could find." Nell looked at the man, trying to decide who it was he reminded her of. It was Uncle Sam. There was even something of the same jauntiness. He would be like that, Nell thought, to have got himself and his old wife into such a place as this to end their days in. She held out her hand to him. "I'm Mrs. McLaughlin." "How do, Mrs. McLaughlin?" Nell noticed that his voice, too, was educated. I stammered Rob, who was bad at names. "I beg your pardon, but I've forgotten your name." "My name's Kittredge," said the man, grasping Nell's hand and shaking it warmly. "Thomas Jefferson Kittredge." Rob looked up, and his teeth flashed in a smile. His dark face was startling handsome, lit by the soft glow of the lantern. Nell noticed that the old woman was staring at him with her mouth open. "Any relation?" asked Rob. "Yes, indeed. I'm on the female side. My grandfather came from Virginia to Oklahoma, and my father, he had a big family, moved on out here. I had a big ranch once, but things went against us a bit. And the boys grew up and went away," interpolated the deep, uncomplaining voice of the woman. "Boys?" exclaimed Nell. "How many?" "Two. One died. The other works in the city, Pittsburgh. So I got a smaller place and tried my hand at dry farming," said the man. "This mare, she's done all my work for years." "I don't need a workhorse," said Rob. "I was interested in a brood mare." "Well, she's a registered thoroughbred," said the man, with an attempt at boastfulness. "She'd have a fine colt. I can show you her papers." "I'm sorry, she'd be too old for me. I'm afraid she wouldn't get through a single winter out on my ranch." As they walked back to the car, the old man was still leading the mare. Nell said gently, "Besides, you must need her for your work, don't you?" "No, we're turkey raising now." "Do you find it profitable?" "Oh, pretty good, when the coyotes don't get them. It's work we can do. Ma, here, herds them for a spell, then I herd them. I could do without the mare." Rob and Nell got into the car. The woman still stood at the window, her hands clutching the edge of it, her eyes peering at Nell. At last she smiled. "You're awful pretty. Too pretty to be living out here. Have you got any children?" "Yes, I have 2 boys." "How old?" 16 and 14. "You don't look old enough to have such big boys." The woman smiled again, a strangely sweet, childlike smile. Nell smiled back at her with a choke in her throat. Mrs. Kittredge stood away from the car. "Well, it's a pretty night, isn't it?" She looked around vaguely. There was a beautiful sunset. "Did you see that sunset?" "Yes, I went out and sat on the back porch and watched it for a long time." Nell reached her hand out of the window and they clasped hands. I was watching it too. Rob started the engine. "Then you don't think you could use the mare?" asked Kittredge. "I'm afraid not." The car was moving. "Thanks very much for giving me a look at her." Nell leaned out, calling a last goodbye. The 3 of them were standing in a row, the old woman's hand clasping her husband's, the mare at his shoulder. In the moonlight they made an odd silhouette. As the car drew away, the wind and the plains and the night closed over them. The ruthless joy one feels when one contrasts one's lot with others and realizes one is better off. The shame that one should be so crudely exultant. And the compassionate wish that there might be a cornucopia pouring out plenty for all. These 3 strong emotions surged within Nell on the drive home. There was another. It was fear. Because after all, it could happen to anyone. It could happen to them. At this thought, she experienced one of those inner tremors that left her physically weak. A sort of spiritual sinking spell. Panic always followed, and the terrible details of destitution, like grimacing pictures, flashed before her eyes. Her slim brown hands clenched in her lap, and she leaned back stiffly. She heard Rob say, "That really was a thoroughbred. I hated to leave her there." "Rob," said Nell, opening her eyes, "wasn't that awful?" "Terrible." "Oh, Rob, let's us never—" He turned on her in sharp anger. "Now there you go, putting yourself in other people's shoes. Are you imagining that we could ever come to that? Forget it. Not people of intelligence, and some sense, some start in life. some advantages. But they had all that. It's no use having sense if you don't use it. There might have been a turning point for them way back. They didn't use good judgment. They didn't have any, or they wouldn't be there. Rob's flat, violent tone of voice served notice on her that he didn't want to hear any more of that. She closed her lips tight, but the seething thoughts went on behind them. They themselves were heading into financial disaster just as fast as they could gallop. It was this fall that Howard was to go east to Bostwick's preparatory school, and the tuition was $1,200, and half of it had to be paid in advance. Where was the money going to come from? And the money for his outfit and travelling expenses? She hadn't dared ask Rob. There would have to be $800 by September the 10th. Perhaps there wouldn't be. At the thought of abandoning their plans for the boy's education, her hands began to tap nervously on her knee. No, anything but that. It would be only 2 years at Bostwick's, and then into West Point, and no more expense. A way must be found. But that wasn't all. What about their own expenses for the coming year? They would need $2,000 to live on, and there was $1,000 of unpaid bills, hardware, veterinary, elevator, machine repair shop, and that $5,000 note to be paid in October. It had to be paid. Last year, the man had extended it for a year and said that was the last time. She sat nervously upright. Rob, is Bellamy going to take the lease for the sheep again this fall? I don't know. Haven't asked him yet, but I suppose he will. Why? The last word was shot at her belligerently. Well, I was just wondering. The lease money. That $1,500. It means a good deal to us. Rob playfully grabbed her by the head with his free hand and shook her. Now you're worrying about money. Don't bother your little head about that. I'll attend to it. Ouch, said Nell, catching at her head. You hurt. She rearranged her hair and returned to her thoughts. Rob, of course, would never see or think what he didn't want to. But suppose he were different. Suppose he was open-minded and reasonable. What ought they to do? What did people do when they had spent half their lives doing something that was, apparently, going to bring them to the poorhouse, if continued? They did not fling good years after bad. They changed. They took another road. But Rob, it was as if he were hypnotized, as if he could not turn or change. He wouldn't even discuss it. Suddenly, she felt angry. Here they were, partners in the greatest possible enterprise, family life, and she must suffer the consequences of failure as well as he, yet he would never allow discussions on unpleasant themes. He would shout at her, browbeat her, create such friction and unpleasantness that she could not bear it. It wasn't fair. Rob took the road out onto the highway and pulled up at the tie-siding post office. He went in for the mail and came out carrying a small box, about the size that holds a dozen eggs. Will you hold this? He said to Nell, putting it gently on her lap. What is it? She asked. Oh, it's chicks. I hear them cheeping. Yes, I ordered them from that old hen that's going to kill herself setting if we don't break her up. As the car started off again, Nell held the box in her ear and listened to the tiny, eager cheeps. How would they take to their new mother? She was an old hen who laid no eggs. No right to have a family, really. Fit only for the stew pot. But Rob had said, no, see if she'll take some chicks. The car was turning in at the ranch road. As Nell felt the warm comfort of homecoming, again came the fear. Rob, she said with desperate courage, don't you ever think of giving up the horses and doing something else? What? Well, you graduated from West Point as an engineer. You mean give up everything? Sell the ranch? Yes. There was a long silence before he said slowly, I've often wondered if you weren't sick of the life out here, if it wasn't too hard for you. It isn't that. She clasped her hands together. It's not that at all. This is my home. I love it. I'd like to be easier, with more help, and a furnace, and money enough for us to go away for 2 or 3 months in the middle of the winter, but it would break my heart to lose it. Are you sure of that? Yes. He looked into her eyes and saw there the bleak dread of the woman who contemplates the loss of her home. Then why did you say what you did? Just the money, the situation we're in. A government loan on the ranch, This other note besides, we're so at their mercy. They could close us out at any time. And then there's the education of the boys, Howard and Ken both. We can't be sure they'll make West Point. And ourselves, our future, we're not getting any younger. The money, repeated Rob slowly. What do you think I would get if I sold out my horses at present prices? Not a third of what I put into them. Not a quarter. And it would be the same with the ranch. I'd just have to give it away. What would it matter? You'd get enough to keep us all until you got something else, engineering, or some business. Rob began to shout. What would it matter? It would matter like hell. I'm not an engineer anymore, or a businessman. I came west, and you came with me, just to raise horses. What if you did? That was long ago. The thing you want to do now is not raise horses or any other special thing, just to make a living and pay our bills. Rob continued as if she had not spoken. Raise horses because I was sure that up here in this high altitude, in a section of line country, the finest horses could be raised, with strong lungs and hearts and endurance, as sure-footed as goats. That's what you need for polo, and I was right. I've proved, the tirade continued, battering down at all Nell's attempts to answer. At last she made no more, but sat silently waiting to get home. Rob calmed down and spoke more quietly. Nell, you can't give up your business just because you've had some bad years. It's all a question of markets. Markets are bad for some years, then they change around and they're good. I would like... Rewind. I would look like a fine fool, wouldn't I, if I sold everything I've got for a song, and then polo picked up, as it's bound to sooner or later, and horses began to sell for good prices. How would you feel then? Nell was disheartened and confused. It hadn't been for just a few years, it had been since the very beginning. Approaching the house, she glanced at the windows. The lights were on downstairs. Upstairs, no lights in the boys' rooms. Asleep. Rob parked the car and they got out, Nell still carrying the chicks. Come up with me to the stable, will you? Asked Rob, and help me with the hen. Suppose she doesn't want to take them? Asked Nell anxiously, and could have bitten her tongue at the next moment. Rob shouted, I'll eat them, one by one, feathers and all, 25 of them. Scalding tears burned in Nell's eyes, as quickly as a welt is raised by a lash. Rob got his electric lantern out of the car, turned it on, and threw a beam of light on the ground before Nell's feet as they went up to the stable. He had put the yellow hen in the tack room. She sat there in her open-topped box, an enormous, stubborn, broody hen, burning with the fever of her longing. Rob held the lantern while Nell opened the box of chicks. Her hands were trembling. Their little cheeps went up in the dark of the tack room, and the hen lifted her head, which had been buried sulkily in her feathers, and turned it, cocking an eye this way and that, listening. The chicks were huddled in one corner of their little box. Did you say 25, Rob? There can't be 25 here. There are, you'll see. Rob's big hand came into the box, took a handful of the chicks and put them down before the hen. They balanced themselves unsteadily, teetering on their tiny yellow feet. The hen's head darted suddenly at one, then at another. She's pecking them, Rob. He hastily placed more of the chicks in the hen's box, and then more, until they were all there. They looked like a fluffy yellow ruffle around the bulk of the old hen. She had pulled her head back into her feathers again. Rob turned the light away from her so that she could be alone in the darkness for her stupendous decision. When they looked again, they saw the hen making suave, graceful, expert motions with her head and neck, curling it this way and that, under one wing, under the other, underneath her body. A soft, murmurous clucking accompanied her motions. She's taking them and tucking them in, said Rob in a low voice. They turned the light away again and waited. When next they looked, there were no chickens to be seen. Just the hen very large and full, head motionless, in profound contemplation. One tiny chick's head stuck out like a button at the joint of a wing. Rob was talking in a quiet, wondering voice. Isn't it the strangest thing? There she was, no eggs, no right to a family, but she sat and brooded and burned and suffered for a month. And if that isn't praying, I don't know what is. And suddenly, Without her doing anything at all, she gets her family. Big hands come down from above. She can't see where. They just come down with handfuls of chicks for her and set them down in the box all around her. 25 of them, more than she could have ever got of her own. A Bible verse sprang into Nell's mind. Try me now, and I shall open the windows of heaven and pour you out such a blessing that there shall not be room to hold it. 25 chicks. Hardly had there been room for her to hold them. One tiny head out up on the top of her back like a button. Hardly room for that last little Benjamin. Walking down to the house, Nell kept thinking about the hen. How did she feel now with her feathers full of life? Did the little ones sometimes struggle and quarrel there, kick and scratch with their tiny yellow legs, peck each other and flutter their wing fluffs all inside of the feathers of the old yellow hen? A world of hidden life there. Halfway down to the house, Rob suddenly stopped walking. I can see that I've been awfully dumb, he said. What do you mean? I've always thought that you were with me. With you? In everything I did. The ranch, my work, the horses, my plans, everything. But Rob, of course, You used to be, he interrupted. I don't know when you changed. I've just been going along like a fool, taking it for granted. Taking what for granted? That you had confidence in me. You oughtn't to put it that way. Married people ought to talk things over with each other, and you never will. It isn't that I haven't confidence in you, but you haven't. That is, you have no confidence in my ever making a go of horses. I know I will if I hang on. I'll force it to succeed. You used to know it too. You were with me, but you don't know it any longer. Nell was silent. Just exactly what would you like me to do? He asked grimly. I don't know. That's just it. You don't know. You don't know anything about it. But while I'm doing all I can to make a go of it, lying awake nights planning how I can keep up or improve my horses and find the best markets, you're sitting back waiting for the crash so that you can pick up the pieces. Oh no, Rob, don't deny it, Nell. Don't lie, I know it. They were standing on the green before the house. The moon so bright that now he switched off the flashlight, and they were bathed in radiance. 2 horses moved along the corral fence. It was Thunderhead and his little sister, Touch and Go. She follows him everywhere, thought Nell, even as she was aware of the feeling of burning weakness flowing through her body. I've done it now. I shouldn't have. It's his work, his responsibility. I should just back him up. Always and always back him up. No, that wouldn't be sincere, wouldn't be fair, because then if a crash came, he'd have a right to say, I should have warned him. I know it, continued Rob doggedly, because for a long time now everything you say and do and think is on the supposition that we will continue going down, poorer and poorer. Well, she suddenly whispered, we are on the downgrade, have been for years. You've said it yourself. You're the one who told me. You're the one who's worrying yourself sick about it, and we're not making any sort of change in our lives, in our plans, so why expect a change in the results? Rob stood facing her, feet apart. His dark head, so significant and arresting, dropped on his chest. The moonlight changed his ruddiness of skin to a greenish pallor. Suddenly, Nell held out her arms. Nothing mattered. She went to him. He pushed her away. Don't, Nell, I can't stand it. She backed away, feeling humiliated. She might have known he didn't want comfort or coddling. He wanted his head up again, before her. But what could she do about that? While she stood, clasping her hands frantically together and fighting the tears that in a moment could be a flood, Rob walked away from her and disappeared. In such moments of unendurable hurt, lovers run away from each other. Nell walked down towards the corrals and stood against the fence. Presently she saw the horses approaching, Thunderhead and Touch and Go. He came to the fence. She spoke his name and held out her hand. He came close. She laid her hand on his face. Thunderhead, Thunderhead. He felt her grief, as horses always do, and shoved his nose against her. Touch and Go must do as her big brother did and pushed her nose up for petting too. When Nell went in, half an hour later, she found Rob sitting in his den, reading the paper, knees comfortably crossed and pipe in his mouth. As she approached him, everything forgotten but the longing for closeness and understanding, he looked up at her. Her iris-coloured eyes were dark with emotion. They were shadowed underneath, but they were full of gentleness and affection, and her smile pleaded for reconciliation. Rob held out his hand to her. She leaned over to kiss him, and he kissed her in return. Their eyes did not quite meet. "Are you going up?" he asked. "Yes." "Don't wait for me. I'm going to read a while." She walked slowly upstairs. Eyes have to be honest, she thought. When you give a direct glance to a person, you give something of yourself. When you cannot give, when you are hiding something, eyes cannot meet. They look past each other, unless you are hardened in deceit. She lit the lamps in their room and began to undress. It was not finished yet, because he would come up. They would sleep in the same bed. It ought to be finished. They were both spent. Well, she would be asleep when he came up. She was exhausted, and he would not wake her. In the morning it would be easier. As she undressed, her thoughts slipped back over the evening. The Kittredge ranch, the ghastly house, the mare, the quality of that old woman. Farther back, to the blue and silver sunset. At the thought of it, a deep breath filled her and her face relaxed in a smile of happiness. Where had she read that? Against life's hurts there are 4 panacées: nature, religion, work, human fellowship. These help us all around you, ready to prop you up when you falter. No one need actually go down. But for her, human fellowship meant Rob and the boys, and it was just those 3 that she worried about, the thought of them not calming. It was nature that helped her most. She had almost made a religion of that. You could find healing for your soul in that. She wondered why, as she brushed her hair until it lay in a soft mass on her shoulders. Perhaps because you loved it. It was so beautiful and alive, and it spoke to you, and whenever you have a feeling of love, it makes you draw that long breath of peace. Even the old woman had been sitting on the back steps watching the blue and silver sunset. After all, nature, it was the classic mother. Slipping into bed, Nell picked up the small leather book on her bedside table and thumbed the pages through, looking for those words of St. Augustine's she had not been able to remember. Ah, here it was. The heavens, sun, moon, stars did answer, "We are not the God whom thou seekest." And I said, "Tell me of him." And they cried out with a loud voice, "He made us." With her knees drawn up and the book open upon them, Nell read it over and over, then laid it back on the table,